Welcome to the ERTH Corporation risk-based approach to capital planning overview. So just a quick agenda for the session. Do quick introductions of and review of ERTH. A look at our history with the Optimizer and how we've used the product and sort of a bit of a transition from 2002 to present day. We'll get into some detail on the Optimizer itself. At a high level, just explaining how the product works and how it handles the various types of risk scenarios. We'll get into doing an actual product demo and then go through a Q&A period. So first, in terms of the introduction, ERTH Corporation, one of its subsidiaries is ERTH Power Line. Power Lines is an LDC servicing 14 communities with 20,000 customers throughout southwestern Ontario. CAPEX for 2014 is budgeted to be $3.2 million. Total assets deployed is $32 million, 45 employees, and about 337 kilometers of distribution lines. ERTH also has a number of subsidiaries. eCaliber Corporation is a accredited meter shop, ISO certified with Measurements Canada, did testing and calibrating a number of the single-phase and three-phase electronic meters, and was the first to be certified to calibrate the electronic meters in Ontario. We are also the largest privately held water meter testing company. We're capable of testing, calibrating, and repairing up to 12-inch meters within our. Crew Solutions is our hydro utility field works group, specializing in MSP work, in LED work. Here's some shots of our various LED projects we have out there, but they're also a full service construction, utility construction, installing pole lines, wind farms. And ERTH Business Technologies hosts and manages back office solutions for a number of utilities across Ontario, hosting Northstar, Microsoft GP, Teleworks, Quadra, LoRa, Paymentus, as well as a number of other solutions, including the Optimizer. Over 15 million bills printed since 2000. Under over 250,000 accounts under managed services, the largest in Ontario, and been in operation for over 14 years. So that's sort of the paid commercial that shameless plug I wanted to get in for ERTH. So let's get in and look now at our history. And it started, I guess, back when with deregulation and the amalgamation. In the way, Erie Thames, as you can see, is an LDC comprised of 14 municipalities. 4 of those municipalities were acquired through an acquisition of Clinton and Mitchell. So at our beginning in 2000, we had 7 municipal shareholders, and all with very different needs and expectations. They obviously wanted money spent in their communities, so we had a number of competing objectives. Jeff Pettit, who is our CEO, was introduced to Encore TXU and a company called UMS, and they're an investor-owned utility, and for them, they had established capital investment programs that were based on risk and the value associated with the risk that is mitigated or deferred based on how you're deploying capital. So as I mentioned, in 2002, there were 7 municipal shareholders, all with competing projects. But we also had some asset condition issues that had to be dealt with. Namely, we had two communities that we were servicing that the infrastructure was in poor shape and needed attention, and so we were just battling with, some of our larger shareholders actually had service territories where the asset condition was very good, and meanwhile we were being forced, based on the asset condition, to spend the bulk of our capital money in other service territories, which was not, they just were not overly supportive. So that's why we were introduced to Encore and this optimizer, which allowed us to objectify the planning process. And what's really involved with the optimizer is we established strategic objectives. In this case, there were 7 strategic objectives that they weighted: financial, service quality, community image, legal, regulatory, safety, environmental. And it's a collaborative approach where we sat our directors down and went through and weighed and evaluated what the strategic objectives were. And it produces a relative scale. So I can assess financial versus service quality, financial versus community image, financial versus legal, financial versus regulatory, financial versus safety, and financial versus environment. And I can weight it relatively to determine what my values are, or we can go in and enter our specific weightings. And in this case, you can see how ERTH's power lines had weighted. For example, safety is rated as 26%, or a quarter of the strategic objectives. That's both public and employee safety, whereas legal and community image were rated at 8% in terms of their overall strategic objectives. So once the strategic objectives are established, and all the projects went through the system was then able to assess each project objectively. And what we saw was we implemented the optimizer, went through that process. We implemented work units, or what we're calling today our design standards, and we attempted to implement a purchasing group. And sort of the outcomes that we realized was that in 2005, we saw a reduction of $600,000 in our proposed versus our optimized capital plan, and that was really based on some projects that just weren't yielding the strategic value that we had established with our constituents. And so we saw the actual project plan being extremely objectified, which led to the approvals and the support from our municipal shareholders. We were able to implement our work units, which allowed us to standardize the construction of our overhead lines. The idea with standardization at that time was that if we standardized our construction, it would allow us to go back to the various suppliers, material suppliers, and look at locking down some improvements in our prices because we had standardized. And unfortunately, that didn't pan out because there isn't a whole lot of options as it relates to various players on the purchasing side. There's a lot of large distributors, but not many. And so what we did instead was created a purchasing group. There's 6 utilities in that purchasing group, and they've standardized the equipment that they're purchasing, things like transformers. They standardized the transformer spec, and the advantage of that is that now instead of having 6 to 12 week lead times for transformers, we have, within our purchasing group, everyone has the same transformers, which, in the event of emergency, it's very easy for us to get our hands on transformers as opposed to waiting. So there's been certainly some benefits. You look at our CAPEX, and at the start, we're hovering around $2 million. And then once we sort of got through the optimization process, we actually saw a $600,000 decrease, which was quite unexpected at the time. And then you can see this sort of sharp decrease was in 2009, and that's the year that we had the strike. And then you can sort of see us a gradual ramp up, quite a significant ramp up actually. And this was us really having to tackle some asset condition issues and some projects that were at high risk. And you can see us sort of ramping all the way up to $3.2 million. And sort of this is where we then get into the new rate regime where, our CAPEX is fixed sort of for a 4-year period. So this gives you an idea of how our CAPEX is. 2006, we became a reseller. We created a separate company and began reselling the solution. And I'd say we had limited success. We brought on a number of customers lots of interest, but sort of around this time, it was the realization, I think, of how the rate structure worked, and organizations that there wasn't as much OEB pressure on the how the capital dollars were being deployed, and there certainly wasn't a lot of scrutiny over after state. So sort of looking back at your CAPEX spend and saying, now you said you were going to spend $1 million on pole replacement. Let's see the $1 million of value you actually replaced. We did lots of demos, but I don't think it was really our company focus. We were very busy at that time, expanding different business lines, and I don't believe it got the focus that it needed. But what was needed at the time was the product itself needed a major facelift. It was Excel-based for entering projects, and so we created a project entry tool that made it a lot easier to create catalogs, multi-year catalogs, got us out of Excel, which in itself can be problematic. It was just a much easier tool to allow us to quickly go in and change our portfolio mix, which allowed us to run multiple scenarios on the projects themselves, so that we could sort of test different scenarios to sort of come up with the optimal one. And here's sort of a look at that interface. This is sort of our project library, and this will be a list of, in this case, we've got about $5 million worth of projects sitting in here. And this is just sort of some data we pulled from a test system. And you can see the project details. And this would be, going through and assessing and assigning risk and identifying the reasons why certain factors are rated the way they are. You're identifying the probability and the consequence, and then the associated value of not doing. And sort of flash forward to today, and I think with the Chapter 5 report that's been released, there's certainly been a heightened interest in asset planning tools. The OEB is expecting there to be a lot more diligence around how dollars are being deployed, how decisions are being made, and tracking that over time to make sure that we are in fact deploying capital the way we identified that we would. Optimizer overview. This is sort of a traditional look at capital planning. So I think most people will agree that needs assessment is patrolling, doing field checks, reviewing your preventative maintenance schedules, looking at your SCADA system, identifying outages, and identifying problems that exist in the field, and creating sort of that catalog. There's some screening and prioritization that's done based on the degree of the nature of the problems that exist in the field, and what's going to improve things. And then there's usually financial assessments that are performed and solutions are selected. What's different about the Optimizer is it will then take that catalog of projects, apply the same metrics, but also review every project based on how it's been rated individually, and compare those against your overall strategic objectives to determine what the ideal spend mix and project spend mix looks like. So the way that it works is the first thing, and I showed this earlier, was that's setting the strategic objectives, and this is done as an iterative process, and it's done as a group and reviewed. Then projects are entered in, and you can enter projects at any time. And again, you can enter 10 years of projects if you like in the system. Typically what we do is our projects are estimated. We will come up with a dollar value for that project based on somebody doing a design or an estimate. And that's entered in the system along with what your expected returns are going to be based on that investment, cost avoidance, etc. The efficient frontier is defined, and sort of what the efficient frontier is it's the intersect where the dollars that you're spending are yielding the highest, or reducing risk to the greatest amount, which is our ideal value. So at that intersect, every dollar that we start spending starts yielding less, reductions from the risk side. And if we go up to the top of this chart, in this range here from $3 to $5 million worth of spend, I can see that I'm only mitigating about 10% risk or realizing 10% of my core strategic objectives. So finding that sweet spot in terms of where you want to spend money is going to sort of be somewhere in this area. And then you optimize. The result of optimizing the projects is that it's going to identify those projects that are high risk, high probability, high consequence, down from sort of red to orange to yellow to green to blue, and sort of the blue representing the the low consequence, low probability. And the reason why you would see in the projects that are solidly filled are the ones that have been optimized and are going forward. The ones that are not have been deferred. And the reason why you'll see something like this occurring is that this could actually be a mandatory project. So it could be a low consequence, it's a low probability, relatively low consequence, but it could be a required project that has to be done, and it's been flagged as such. So the way the optimizer works is you've got your, I'm gonna pretend we're optimizing over 2 years here. So I've got $5 million worth of projects up here, and I've allocated that I want to spend $1.5 million in 2013 and $1.9 million in 2014. I've got projects from road widening, tree trimming, service connections in 2013, service connections in 2014, some mandatory projects, a rebuild in Port Stanley. And when the optimizer process, what it does is it identifies those projects that are of the high risk and or projects that are required, and it will go through and optimize those and drop those into the appropriate buckets. And then the rest of the projects, the higher risk ones, will again be processed and either be allocated to the correct bucket or deferred. Or in this case of this Harris upgrade, portion is going to be allocated to 2013 and a portion is going to be allocated to 2014. Okay, and then all the remaining projects will go. And then situations like this where you've got 250 poles to be replaced, what it'll do is if you set these up as a unit-based project where pole replacement would be, what it's doing is it's saying, hey, of the total spend, I'm going to recommend that you do 90 poles in 2013 and 160 poles in 2014, and it just allocates them to the correct buckets. And that'll give you your optimized solution. So in terms of the product review, unfortunately, I'm not going to go into the system with this. I did during the original demo. But for saving time here, I'm just going to go through a couple of screenshots. Again, this is what you get with your heat map that you'll get, sort of identifying the projects. What you're most concerned about are the projects that weren't optimized. And so you'll go through and do a process of identifying and reviewing these projects that weren't optimized and make sure that you're okay with these projects being deferred. And what will happen in most cases is that there will be a number of scenarios. We're seeing sort of 8 to 10 iterations of scenarios being run to simply test and make sure that we're comfortable with the portfolio that's been optimized for the years that we've selected, and make sure we're comfortable with these projects being deferred. And if we're not, then we have to ask ourselves, are we rating things correctly? And if we are, then that's what we go forward to our board with for approval. You can see based on this that in 2012, 2013, and 2012, we realized 100% of our strategic objectives. There was a $1.5 million spend, and we were able to realize 100% of our strategic objectives. In 2013, a $2.2 million spend yielded a 78% strategic value realization. And that means if I spent $2.5 million, I might be able to get that number up to, let's say, 85%. So a $300,000 increase could yield a 7% increase in my improvement in my strategic value, or it could be a 1%. And that's sort of the reason why we go through and do run a number of iterations, just to make sure that I found sort of that ideal mix. And we tend to like to target around 80% of our strategic value to achieve. And this is looking across those strategic objectives just to see how much of each one I've realized. And financial seems to be low, so maybe there weren't any projects rated for to have a significant financial value improvement, or they just didn't get optimized. So again, happy to go through an online demo with anybody that wasn't able to attend the session, and answer any questions. And thank you for your time.